Welcome to the show, Ben Calder, and you are the founder of the Centre for Integral Health. You're a kinesiologist interested in epigenetics and specialising in nutrition. Well, that's a whole load of stuff there. We could go anywhere in that conversation, Ben.
Hi, Elaine. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, lots of years, well, 16 and a half years in professional practice and almost 30 years since I started, from a personal point of view, looking at sort of complementary and alternative health as well. So yeah, you could say there's quite a bit of stuff in there.
Not bad for a 25-year-old.
Is that how young and beautiful I still look? Thank you.
Yeah,
You get
you
full
do.
marks today.
Wonderful. Okay, so first of all, the Centre for Integral Health. Why did you create that? Where is it? What do you do there?
So we're based in Shrewsbury, in Shropshire, so West Midlands, just on the Welsh border. And part of the reason why I founded the centre was, at the time, there was nowhere else that was offering a specific integral approach to health. So complementary health as a process seems to come from this idea of holism or a holistic nature, but it doesn't necessarily overtly recognize some of the aspects that we benefit from looking at in health. And there was an American philosopher, Ken Wilber, who really in the mid-90s fully coined the idea of integral theory, where we, at the very least, look at reality from both subjective and objective point of views, also looking at how aspects vary between the individual and the collective. So there's always a part of us that is our mind, which is our subjective self, and our body, our objective self, that's sat in a culture, which is the subjective collective, and that's in a physical environment, which is the objective collective. So it's quite a complex theoretical model in a lot of ways, but it gives us a very clear way of looking at the body and health and understanding where problems might arise within it, and also looking at areas that individuals might not be fully caring for themselves in. So, you might have brilliant mental health but not look after your body or your relationships, or you might live in a poor environment. So these other aspects can affect your health. And I wanted somewhere that really overtly and clearly highlighted all of these different aspects, so that people kind of knew when they were coming to us that we weren't just looking from a symptomatic point of view. We were really trying to understand deep causative aspects within their health, so we could give them the best support and help possible.
That's a brilliant explanation of integral health, and as opposed to what I recommend to people, they take an integrated approach, which
Sure.
in my simplistic world is taking the best that everybody has to offer and sort of integrating it. So for those in the UK, the best of the National Health Service, and integrating it with alongside complementary therapies and so on. So there's integral, which is kind of the whole body, mind, environment, the whole bit. And there's also integrated. So
and of course the integral model also takes on board all of that which you see as integrated, and for instance, we can understand that most of our NHS based medicine is really referring to the objective body. So it's looking at the body from a mechanistic point of view, but it doesn't necessarily take into account how the culture around illness might be affecting somebody's health. The beliefs that we have about people that have cancer or have HIV or have serious conditions, and how we treat them on a cultural level. So it's quite a complex space, but it really helps us to understand, well, which bits are being covered, which bits are being supported, and then which bits aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an awful lot to it, and I find that we've got so many specialists these days, specialists in every topic you can throw a stick at, but none of the specialists seem to talk to one another. And
Sure, yeah.
you go to a specialist for this part of your body or that part of your mind or whatever it is, whether it's NHS or an integral practice, but so few practitioners know about the whole lot, which is why I'm always interested to talk to you, Ben, because you, with your studies you've done and your actual practical applications over the years, you've got it all together, which is wonderful.
Yeah, sure. But as time goes on and the more is learned, I realize there's more and more to integrate and become aware of, and more possibilities. So it's which is good in one way, because there's a never-ending range of ways to skin the proverbial health cat. So we can always find other approaches and other aspects. So even when we get people that turn up with us and they've been through the NHS route and only achieved a certain amount of change, and they've tried all sorts of different therapies, they often come in with this sort of slumped shoulder. I've tried everything, nothing's helping me, I don't know how to go. And we're already there going, well, that's okay. Let's have a look at where you have been, and then we can work out where you haven't been and see which aspects of that might apply with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So why have you concentrated on kinesiology, epigenetics, and nutrition? What's the big deal with those areas?
So one of the things that we find, or I find with a lot of the people that I see, is that the way that they've become ill, and I don't look at illness as an event really, unless there's been something significant like a car crash or a real piece of traumatizing activity. I don't look at it as an event, but an accumulation. We're the sum total of all the things that we have and haven't done. And one of the reasons why people are ill is because some of those choices that they've made do not support them. And one of the reasons why they're not worse off is because some of the choices that they make support them and encourage health with them. And one of the things that I find with a lot of people is that they don't even recognize the basic fundamentals of how their vehicle works. And a lot of us, we know how to use our phones, but we don't really have an idea of how the phone actually works. We know how to use our cars, but we don't really know how the car works. And our bodies are often the same. We kind of know how to use it, but we don't really understand how it works. And we don't really understand the implication of the quality of the parts we put in, the quality of the fuel we put in, the regularity and the nature of the servicing we give our body as a vehicle, but also our state, our mental state as the driver. And, I kind of, again, this is the subjective and objective sides of that integral model. And so very few people, they know that something's not right. They know that they don't feel good. And they want a very simple way to be able to start taking control and start taking positive measures. And I find, because within epigenetics, we use three sort of generalized body typologies that link roughly into kind of endomorphic, ectomorphic, and mesomorphic body structures. And so this is basically tall people, short people, and people in the middle. And we can look at genetic typology coming from that, and there's a series of generalizations that we can apply to it. And I often link this to a little bit like knowing whether or not your car is petrol, diesel, or hybrid electric. And because you've just had to kind of guess for the whole of your life, you don't really know what type of fuel and the mechanics of the vehicle you're using. So the epigenetics work allows us to explore that information so that people can understand, okay, my system will run better if I fuel it like this and treat it like this. And so often people will say to me, I've kind of noticed in the past when I ate like that or I behaved like that, I was so much better. I don't know why I didn't stick with it. And so it's a really good step to really give people power and to give them choice so that they can improve their health by understanding the blueprint of who they are as a human being.
That's a great explanation. And in essence, it's about knowing our body, isn't it? And as you say,
really?
If we're eating something or drinking something that doesn't agree with us, then, don't do it again. Take note of it, be aware of it, concentrate on the things that do make your body work better and make you feel happier and healthier.
Absolutely. And it's not always easy for people to really understand how complex the body is and how many processes are going on. And if we take something as simple as the energy production within the cells that are done by the mitochondria, the little tiny organelles inside the cells, very few people realize, you see a diagram in a biology textbook or an anatomy textbook, and there might be 3 or 4 mitochondria bouncing around in a cell diagram. But when you realize that in muscular cells, there's 2,000 of those little organelles per cell, in cardiac and in some of the neuronal cells, we've got 5,000 of these little organelles working away to produce energy for each cell. And all of them are magnesium dependent, or they're zinc dependent, or they require certain activated B vitamins. And being able to use kinesiology as a diagnostic tool to find out, so the 2 things that we see the most probably are pain and tiredness. They're the 2 commonest kind of statements that I get for people looking for change in their life. And so we can use kinesiology to literally track through and find out whether or not the energy production within the cells is operating. And if it isn't, where is it falling down, and what's the thing that changes that, so that we can give them very clear information about what we're finding and how to change it. And they feel empowered to then go away, put this stuff into process, and we see some fabulous changes with it.
Give us a rundown for the listeners' benefit who've not come across. You pronounce it kinesiology. I know it as kinesiology. Give us a rundown on what it is and why we should take note of it.
I mean, it's an incredible tool, and it's kind of meaning in a general sense is manual muscle monitoring or muscle testing. And kinesiology was developed really in the late 50s by a very famous chiropractor called George Goodhart, who went on and formed the International College of Applied Kinesiology. And over the next kind of 30 years, there was well over 20 different schools of kinesiology that developed from his original work. And they all use muscle monitoring. So they're all putting limbs into fixed positions that represent the way that a muscle contracts, and then applying pressure into that and observing whether or not the muscle engages or whether or not it inhibits. And we're able to use that binary response because the muscle either switches itself on, it engages, or it inhibits and doesn't switch on. So we either get a muscle that stays static or it moves. And we can use this as feedback from the nervous system to show us whether or not something is supportive for the body or whether or not something has an inhibitory effect. And this is something that we've actually all been doing for the entirety of our lives. We just don't know that that's what's happening, and therefore we don't use it as a resource. So as an easy example, if somebody you don't like comes around the corner, there's this sinking, the whole body has that little collapse, and you'll feel the gut drop, you'll feel parts of the body drop. And you can get it if you get a piece of bad news, or if something that you're not sure about doesn't work out. There's this sense of in the system. Whereas in the contrary, if you see somebody you haven't seen in ages and it's really exciting, or you get some good news or something positive happens, there's this sense of upliftment that comes into the body. And my brother and I sometimes refer to it as red light, green light. So the red light is this kind of sinking, heavy, contractive space. The green light for go is this kind of expansive, uplifting state. And so we're using that as a barometer for the body to say, yes, do this, or no, don't do that, in a very simplistic way.
Okay, I like that, red light and green light. That sounds a good title for a book.
Sure, yeah. What should we do? What should we not do?
Yes, yeah, okay. So you mentioned about different body types, and I guess within that you're also talking about different types of metabolism.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. And we have essentially the 3 basic typologies. And of course, these are generalizations, and people have aspects that are individually unique to them. And we also kind of highlight and identify those as well. But within those three major body types, we have what we class as the gonadal types, that are the kind of the shorter, squatter type people. So they're short and broad generally, and they seem to do really well following dairy-free vegetarian based diets, low protein, and they're grazers as well. So they're the people that kind of like to pick through food, generally have low stomach acid, don't do so well at having big meals or having protein rich meals. So their systems metabolize light food, and it's better if there's a little amount of it. And then we have an adrenal type, which are the kind of the taller, stronger percentile in the body, and their metabolism is really driven by their adrenal cortex. And so they're the work hard, play hard, tenacious people that get stronger as the day goes on. And generally, they do really well on a good mixed diet. So not too much erring towards vegetarian and veganism, not too much erring towards kind of high protein, paleo, ketogenic styles, but somewhere in the middle of all of that. And in fact, the variation, and this is actually my genetic typology. So I find that I probably eat kind of veggie vegan about half the time, and then I eat more towards paleo the other half of the time, and that just suits my body really well, and I can just listen into it and listen to what it needs for that. And then we have the thyroidal types that tend to be kind of the middle height, but often very slim and willowy type people. And their metabolism is really governed by the thyroid, and they really do best off the kind of the classic paleo style, high protein, moderate fat, low carbohydrate diets. They tend to really not do well with gluten and grains, and they tend to be much better off on the kind of the paleo ketogenic style food. And it's essential for them to be having breakfast and to kind of follow that classic pattern of breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, dinner like a pauper.
Right, okay. It's interesting, all these different names we have for things. But at the end of the day, whatever we're eating is vital to absorb, isn't it? So talk us through about the absorption process. How does it work, and why do we need to observe our body and notice what the absorption levels are within us?
Yeah, I mean, we've all come along with the pattern of we are what we eat. You know, Gillian McKeith made that really famous when she was kind of profiling kind of a decade or so ago. But more importantly, we've got to remember that our alimentary canal is essentially an outside of us that runs through the middle of the body. So it's a hollow tube that's convoluted and twisted in a series of amazing ways, with lock gates and all sorts of other things in it. But essentially, it's very similar to the outside of us. It's a protective layer. So you could almost think of us more of an elongated ring donut, that the membrane between that kind of crusty, sugary outside of the donut and the soft, doughy bit inside, we've also got that within the gut. And so the initial point of absorption is always through the gut. And if we don't absorb, then it doesn't matter how good the quality of what we're putting in is. What's actually getting to the important part is very limited. And so we've got a couple of layers of the self that we can have problems with. And the first of that is the gut lining. And we can have an incredible amount of congestion from poor bowel movement, which can lead to compacted feces through parts of the digestive tract and old rubbish just being left in there. And so our absorption through the bowel can be quite poor. But almost more important than some of this residue is the health of the gut bacteria. So the gut bacteria are a little bit like the fungus for roots on plants, is essential for helping us to digest and transfer some of the matter that we digest and move it in through the gut lining into the bloodstream. The ability that we have for chewing our food thoroughly and making sure that we fully masticated. And I was talking about this last weekend on one of my Qigong workshops, and talking about a yogi who was published in a series of Time supplements all the way back in the early part of the 1900s. called Ramacharaka, and he had a very simple adage that was drink your food and eat your drinks. And it simply meant to chew as thoroughly as you could until everything in your mouth was liquid. So that when your digestive enzymes start to act on it, they're acting on the most broken down form of that food that they can, because they have a finite capacity to be able to digest. And so if we haven't broken the food up enough in the mouth, there's a limit to how much the enzymes will then break down the food. And anything that doesn't break down hangs around and it starts to ferment. And that can often be where we end up with our bloating, our discomforts, and our wind. So the chewing, the gut bacteria, first part of that absorption process. But then the quality of the cells that line the gut bacteria, and these are some of the most rapidly replacing in the body. But like a lot of our cell membranes, they're all phospholipid membranes. They're all actually made of fat. And so, again, these low-fat diets and all this obsession we've had over the last kind of 40 years of low fat has actually been causing our gut linings to be less healthy than they could be. So having an essential amount of the correct and appropriate fats into our diet, making sure that they're not rancid is quite important to even get stuff into the bloodstream. And then from that point, we've then got cell membrane diffusion from the bloodstream into the tissues where the body needs it. And again, this is all phospholipid based. So if the fats within the diet are not correct and not right, we have cell membranes and cell receptor sites that are bordering on being rancid. And there's a really interesting compound that our bodies give off called malondialdehyde when those fats in the cell membranes just start breaking down and going rancid on us. And it's really not useful. So those layers that we have, we need to be able to make sure that they're all healthy before we can even get nutrients into the cells.
Wow, gosh, there's such a lot there.
Yeah, sure.
So for the benefit of the listeners, what are the easy things people can do at home? You've mentioned fats.
Yeah.
So what are the good fats that we should be eating or consuming?
I mean, this is a really interesting topic as well. So everybody's body requires a range of, if we just take the basics of omega-3, 6, and 9s, so basic essential fatty acids to go into the body. Now, it's very easy for us to generally get our omega-6s, and we can get that through a lot of the cold-pressed seed oils, and also our omega-3s we can pick up through things like flaxseed, fish oils, but the quality is paramount. And this was highlighted very recently. We were having a discussion at the Epigenetics annual conference about olive oil and about the qualities of olive oil and where we can get good quality olive oil from. And we were looking at a report that came out a few years ago where a German researcher had taken 31 brands, not samples, but different brands of olive oil from supermarkets in the UK and sent them to an oil testing panel in Italy to be examined. So these are all labeled as extra virgin, and so all being sold as cold pressed and the best quality oil that you could get. Now, when the Italian panel investigated them, they found that only one of the 31 was even extra virgin. 9 of them were virgin or refined. And then the other 21 were all lampante, which is lamp oil, not fit for human consumption. And so we have to be super careful about what we buy. And if we want really good oil, I mean, again, fats like butter, coconut butter, good quality organic sources, but our oils, our seed oils need to be virgin, cold pressed, organic, and from a reliable source. And they need to be in glass, and that has to be dark glass. Otherwise, by the time you've bought them, they are already rancid and already useless.
That's interesting, and it just shows how effective the marketing of these brands are. If 31 of them, only one of them actually was what it said on the container. So for the consumer, the average consumer going into a store, if it says on there cold pressed virgin olive oil, you'd expect it to be that. So I think your point about the make, the brand is really important.
Sure. And you always know that if it's not in dark glass, it's rancid. You can follow that as a rule of thumb, because oils oxidize so very quickly, and if they're not produced very well and they're not produced in very good standards, then before we've even got hold of them, they'll have been rancid and sitting around for way too long. And it's amazing how many deodorizing processes and clarification processes cheap oils go through to make them fit for human consumption. And even then, they're technically not fit for human consumption.
Okay. So I've heard about the balance between the omegas. You mentioned 3, 6, and 9, and I'd heard that the important ratio is to have the 3 and the 6 1-to-1 ratio.
Sure.
I read a report recently that's saying that the average European has a ratio of about 17-to-1 omega-6
Yes.
to omega-3. What's your view on that? What can we do about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially, I've also kind of read into that data, and we tend to, within the epigenetics work, we look for an ideal ratio of somewhere between 1-to-1 and 4-to-1. And as you say, many people are anywhere between 12-to-1 and 17-to-1 when you look at them. And it's usually a lack of omega-3 oils, and it's the omega-3s that are coming through in our fish oils, and we also get a good balanced ratio in things like hemp oil, and we also get a good source of omega-3 from flax as well. So flax is one of the best ways, and fish oil is one of the best ways of boosting that omega-3 and lifting those ratios up. Plus, of course, it's useful if we identify where our sources of omega-6 are coming in. So how much cold-pressed seed oil, things like sunflower oils, are we using for, as margarine, or how many processed products are we using that have oils in? And again, these will tend to be omega-6s that have probably gone rancid in the product already. So just having that awareness within the processed food and making sure then that we're using cold-pressed seed oils, which are best absorbed in the evening, interestingly enough. So putting oil on your breakfast and on your lunch is not as effective as if you have it in your evening meal. Your body produces more of its lipase in the evenings, so we get much better absorption of fat in the evenings.
Interesting. So what's your view on the to improve gut health? I read from time to time articles about colonic hydrotherapy. Is that a good thing to do to clear the compacted matter away, or is it going to disrupt the situation?
A little bit of that depends on who is doing it in terms of the practitioner, and also who's having it done in terms of the participant. I mean, personally, I'm not a massive fan of colonics because they're quite a strong process, and I'm more for encouraging a top-down approach and looking at gentle bowel clearing. So using things like bentonite clay, using things like psyllium husk, so that you can kind of broom out the bowel over a longer period of time. And again, making sure that you're eating a good range of leafy greens and other vegetables that have plenty of cellulose fiber in them that is hard to digest, but also contains a lot of our insoluble fiber, which is really useful as a prebiotic. So it can encourage the growth of our healthy bacteria because it's kind of to a degree indigestible by our gut. So it helps to sweep it all through, plus encourage those healthy gut bacteria. So for me, I'm much more a fan of the top-down approach. Plus, it's also really important, if you're not sure, to have your gut bacteria checked by somebody that can look at a range of bacteria. And again, from the epigenetic point of view, we tend to look at there's about sort of just over 20 bacteria that are commensurable for all human guts, and all human digestive tracts should have them. And it's easy to go and, get one of these fairly pointless drinks from a supermarket that's probiotic, or to go and buy a probiotic from a health food shop and think that that's going to be useful. And it might be. But part of the problem can come is that all of the gut bacteria, the individual strains, all have slightly different roles, and they all live in slightly different parts of the gut in colonies, and they do different things for us, produce different B vitamins, for instance, support the immune system in slightly different ways. Now, if you've got plenty of, let's say, acidophilus in your system, but you're lacking one of the other lactobacillus strains, you might add more acidophilus in and be crowding out the strain that's already in deficiency. So it's always, from my opinion, very important to be checked to see whether or not the gut bacteria that you're taking is actually the ones that you need, because otherwise you might not solve the issue you're trying to solve and therefore think that the gut bacteria hasn't worked, but you could also be adding to problems that are there as well.
How can we check our gut bacteria?
Go and see a good kinesiologist, or have a stool sample done to explore that. So obviously I use kinesiology because then we can just trigger a reflex within the bowel itself, and we can compare it against all of the gut bacteria strains, and only the ones that the body requires will indicate for the body. So it's nice and simple for us.
Okay, I didn't know that. Didn't know you could do that with kinesiology. Fascinating.
Oh yeah, we've got a mind of incredible stuff that we can do to even examine things all the way down to a chromosomal level in your DNA, so that we can see which chromosomes are expressing adverse patterns for you and how to help those.
You've mentioned prebiotics and probiotics. What's the difference?
So a prebiotic essentially is probiotic food. And it's often in the form of insoluble fibers, and sometimes in the form of things like fructooligosaccharides, which are a type of kind of starchy sugar. The food sources are the best and the clearest food sources. One of the best of those is actually a compound called inulin that you find in Jerusalem artichokes. And this is one of the reasons why artichokes are jokingly referred to as fartichokes at times, because all of that insoluble fiber in the body, as you eat the artichokes, is encouraging the probiotics to kind of activate and boost themselves. And some of that for a short period of time can produce a bit more wind. And so the prebiotics are feeding and nurturing the environment for those probiotics to grow.
Right, it's interesting. How interesting. So prebiotic is and we can buy inulin, can't we? We can inulin drops.
That's right, yeah, and you can pick up Jerusalem artichoke extracts and inulin powder extracts and prebiotic mixes as well. And again, if we think our gut bacteria is okay but just needs a boost, we can use that prebiotic. But to a degree, a good, broad, healthy diet that's got plenty of green leafy and starchy veg in there will also do that for you.
Okay, and then we've got the penotype clay in the psyllium husk if we need a bit of extra help with the. You think I'm right in saying you should be having that before meals, psyllium husk?
Yeah, that's right. So and with plenty of water as well, so that again it's just sweeping through the system, and because it expands quite a lot when you take it. So again, if you've got people that are constantly hungry, it's an interesting way of filling yourself up. It doesn't really have any nutrient value to it, but it will give you that sense of feeling full, because the psyllium just expands with water, and that's just kind of draws very nicely through the bowel.
Right. Okay. So we've had a really good run through of our gut with you. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I hope listeners aren't about to sit down for their tea, but if they are, they can be aware of what they're eating. So what I'm hearing is that if our gut is working properly, it doesn't matter an awful lot about what we're eating, but it's better if we can have organic and fresh and do all those nice things. But it's almost like providing we've got good gut health, then what we put in isn't quite so important. So for people on low incomes, for example, and in poorer environments, the most important thing would be to concentrate on the gut, eating fresh food where you can, obviously avoiding processed food. Ideally we want everything right, don't we? We want organic, fresh, leafy green vegetables, mixed diet, etc., and a good gut.
I mean, up to a point, I would agree with that, but there are some other things that can really affect the gut health as well. So, for example, a lot of the pre-washed salads that we buy in supermarkets, they've been washed in chlorine bleach. And if we think back to Domestos adverts, what does bleach do? Kills most of the bacteria.
99%, yes, yeah.
That's right, sure. So we're actually, and all of your pre-washed vegetables in supermarkets are chlorine washed because they want to kill the bacteria on them so that they can be in storage and transport for longer periods of time. So what we're doing over short periods of time is we're actually sterilizing our guts with a lot of the food that we eat. So to say that the food we take on isn't as important, there's a certain point that's true up until, but then there's another level that it really isn't. And the same if we're having pesticide laden fruit and vegetables as well. Again, those some of those can temporarily inhibit digestive enzymes and cause us other issues in the gut as well. So we should always be aiming for the best quality food, and that in itself will also help to support the gut. And there are other little things like in a lot of nutritional supplements. And again, if you want to understand the quality of your nutritional supplements, go and have a look for all the ingredients, the excipients, the binders, and the fillers that have been added. And you'll find in a number of what I would class as lower quality high street style supplements that there are considerable numbers of binders, fillers, and excipients in there. And the worst of which, in my mind, is something called magnesium stearate, which is an agent that is used within the manufacturing process to prevent the ingredients sticking to the machines. So the key that it prevents that adherence in the machines also affects the way that our guts absorb. So you can be taking exactly the right supplementation, exactly the right dose, and exactly the right form, but if the product that you're taking has got magnesium stearate in, you've already limited how you'll absorb it. So whereas you may be thinking that you're taking 100 milligrams or 500 milligrams of a nutrient, you might only be absorbing as little as 10 to 15% of that. So really where you think maybe 1 or 2 capsules would be sufficient for you, you might actually need 6 or 8 to get to the dose that you were hoping to take.
Gosh, again, checking with a kinesiologist that would tell you what dosage you should be taking and what quality, etc., etc.
Yeah, sure. And obviously you can also use things like functional medicine, and they can do a lot of blood testing and stool testing and other aspects for you as well. So there are other ways to do it. Although, again, there's that part of me that always watches on blood level results, because sometimes you can show signs of excess and deficiency simultaneously. You might have really high blood levels of a nutrient, but again, if those cell membranes are not functioning adequately, you could still be deficient and starving inside the cell. And vitamin D is a really interesting aspect of that, because vitamin D, again, is a fat-soluble vitamin. It works on the nuclear receptor inside the cells. So having a high blood level of vitamin D doesn't necessarily mean that your vitamin D levels are adequate and doing their jobs.
Oh, interesting, because it said that most people with cancer would have low vitamin D levels.
Sure, yes, that's right. And would benefit enormously from boosting those because of how they can support the immune system. But it's getting the active hormonal form of that through cell membranes into the nuclear receptors to be able to do that job in the first place.
So what would be the best quality vitamin D to take? How is it best absorbed?
So we're just coming into a really interesting development in the supplement market, if we're looking at supplementing it, and that is with what are known as liposomal formulas. So liposomal formulas are very, very cleverly made, where they've taken 2 of the essential fats that are used to make cell membranes, which is phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylserine, and these help to make these phospholipid membranes. And under pressure, what they do is they squeeze the nutrient molecules inside essentially a ball of this fat, of this phosphatidylcholine and serine. And that allows the cell membranes to just totally absorb and very easily to absorb those nutrients, right to the point where you don't even have to take them orally. You can actually just rub them into the skin, and the skin will absorb them straight through into the bloodstream. So that's an incredible delivery system. But always with vitamin D, one of the best things we can do is get natural sunlight. And the RDA for vitamin D is around 1,000 international units. And yet, if during the summertime, so anywhere between spring equinox and autumn equinox in the UK, when the angle of the sun is correct, if I uncover 40% of my body, so essentially if I've got my t-shirt off and I stand outside for 20 minutes, I will make about 20,000 international units. So our level of vitamin D within our body can be, it could do with being quite high. And a lot of people, they buy, kind of either 600 international unit, 1,000 international unit supplementation, and they think that that's adequate. Whereas really, they probably want to be looking at 5 to 10,000, if not more, a day. And again, of a good quality source. And I don't recommend capsules with vitamin D because it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so it should be in an oil base. Again, helping the absorption through the system.
Wonderful. You mentioned water, with the psyllium husk in particular, drinking lots of water because of the expansion and flowing through, etc.
Yeah.
What's the best kind of water? Because I wouldn't dream of touching tap water, but there are so many different conflicting reports I'm seeing about water. So what's your view on water and what you consider to be quality water these days?
That is an incredibly difficult question, and it depends how deep you want to go into it. So if we take bottled mineral waters as an example, anything in plastic, immediately problematic because there'll be aspects of the plastic in the water. We could look at the calcium-magnesium ratios within there, and really we should have twice as much calcium as magnesium as the ratio. But frequently, again, you can be looking at 10 to 15 to 20 times more calcium than the magnesium in the water. So again, those ratios are essential. I mean, personally, I use a very good quality water filter called a Berkey. And because I live in a rented accommodation, I don't have this plumbed in. So Berkeys are incredible gravity filters, and they're only about one step away from water distillation. And for me personally, looking at things like distillation and reverse osmosis, the water has lost too many aspects of its, it literally is H2O. So all of the trace elements that are in there are not good. Personally, I prefer harder waters because they tend to have trace elements held in them from the rock that they've come through. But putting them through a good quality filter, again, especially to take out things like the chlorine, it's used a lot in the sterilization of drinking water, as are other compounds like halazone. And again, if you're unlucky enough to be in a fluoride kind of dosed water area, then really you want to make sure that the filters are removing fluoride for you as well.
Okay, so lots of things that we've discussed have been. We could probably do whole programs on each of the topics.
Sure.
It's a shame I haven't got more of your time at the moment, so I'm sure you'll be back on the show talking about other aspects in due course.
Thanks, Elaine. I'd love that.
Just to summarise, then, Ben, what would be a kind of a healthy regime for the average person in the UK to adopt? Healthy sort of day-to-day lifestyle, should we say?
If we were going to keep it as simple as possible, filtered water, good quality and as much as possible organic fruit and veg that's seasonal. So, eating strawberries at Christmas, not a good plan. Stick with the stuff that's seasonal, try and buy as much organic as possible, and eat real food. So try and stay away from the processed food as much as possible, and the convenience food and the snack bars and all that kind of other stuff, and try and eat as much real food as possible. And listen to your body. Really, kind of inquire if it's thirsty, if it's hungry, what it's really hungry for, and where possible, have somebody help you with this. So keep a food diary where you look at portion sizes, but also look at your mood and your energy. So, you can have 3 columns within your food diary. One is what you ate and how much you ate. The second is what your mood was like in the kind of the time after that until your next meal, and what your energy was like. So you can kind of have a little bit of comparison as to, well, after I ate that type of food, this is how my mood went and this is how my energy was. So you're starting to build this real sense of awareness, because we're all so individual. The demands on our time and our bodies are so individual that we kind of need to do a little bit of inquiry, and there isn't entirely a one diet fits all process, and we always need to refine. Ideally, go and see a kinesiologist or a nutritional therapist or a functional medicine specialist to check in that you're not having foods that you have allergy or sensitivity to, but eating real food and making time for food. So rather than eating on the hoof, or shoving food down quickly, or still being at your desk at work while you're eating, step away from the desk, take time for food, because that act of preparation is part of what stimulates the digestive enzymes as well. So when we're preparing food, our body already has that idea of what's coming, so it's really ready for it. Whereas if we're just kind of grabbing something that's processed, packed, shoving it in our faces in 10 minutes before we get on with work, from a holistic point of view, that's not really nurturing us. It's just filling a hole.
Okay, very comprehensive. I've just thought of another question to ask you about pH.
Okay.
The acid-alkali balance in our body. When I had cancer, I was continually told, "Oh, you must have a pH of 7.365 because that's what you need to do." I've since learned that that's the pH of our blood, and it's nonsense.
Yep.
We can't, nobody's going to regulate your actual blood pH nor test it. But
That's right.
I never got more than 5.5 on my urine. And
Sure.
I was constantly told, "Oh, that's rubbish, blah blah blah." Actually, for me, that's perfect, because
Sure.
I now do testing. So
Yeah.
what can you tell the listeners about the pH acid alkali conversation?
So if we take an extreme version of that and look at something like gout, where we've got acidosis in the system, we've got high levels of uric acid within the system, and we know that comes from excessive consumption of high purine-rich and acidic-forming foods such as red meats, alcohols, cheeses, that kind of stuff. It's clear that there is imbalance in a diet at that end. But at the same time, a system that is overtly and overly alkaline, the immune system is likely to be impaired. Because when we're talking about pH, where are we talking about it? And you beautifully highlighted that, blood pH levels, urine pH levels, but the pH in the mouth compared to the stomach, compared to the small intestine, compared to the large intestine, compared to the blood, compared to the interstitial fluid, they are all different, and they're all different for a reason. And to really constantly focus on like litmus test paper, for instance, as the measurement of how healthy you are, is a little bit like misleading us in a way. And again, it's about having the balance in the diet. So if we're breathing correctly, if we're taking enough fluids on, and again, water in itself is the only thing we're really thirsty for. Everything else is just a habit. Making sure that we're having that good range of healthy natural food in there, then we shouldn't really have to concern ourselves with the pH. And I think a lot of people make a poor extraction from Otto Warburg's work, where he's looked at cancer and talked about it only existing in acidic and hypoxic environments. So, and those really are symptoms rather than cause. The cause is really coming from poor diet and lifestyle choices, along with trauma. And, if we can resolve those, and again, eating right for our body types and eating healthily, and looking at all those integral aspects, where's my mind, where's my body, how's my relationships, how's my environment, and all of these factors change that. High stress within our system is more likely to increase our acidity, because our immune system is protecting us just in case we're under threat from something.
So you mentioned eating right for your type. I'm an A blood type, and I understand that A blood type's a red flag for digestive disorders.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally tend to use the blood typing diets. In the kind of the research I first did it in them kind of about 14, 15 years ago, I found that some of their genetic correlations didn't really add up quite right. And according to their typology, I should be a vegetarian in my diet. And I, for 12 years, I did that, and it just made me sick. And despite all of the knowledge I had about having a balanced and equal diet, and everything I did to manage my protein levels and manage my fat levels appropriately, so that it was good for me, it just didn't work. And only by disagreeing with my blood type and bringing in, which interestingly my epigenetic body type highlights, to have a mixture of protein within my diet, but not an excessive amount. And that's what keeps me healthy and well. And I've pretty much been the same weight now for a number of years because I'm following this consistent pattern. And it doesn't seem to matter too much what I do or how much I eat, because I eat the right types of food for myself.
And again, it highlights the importance of knowing your body. All those years you were ill, you were going along with whatever was written academically, but it doesn't matter in some senses. It's nice to read reports and know what current thinking is, but at the end of the day, as you mentioned earlier, we're all individual, and we really have to. It's not negotiable. We have to listen to our body. We have to follow what it wants.
Totally, and that's the exploration. I mean, I can always remember when I read Gandhi's autobiography. One of the things that he talked about very close to the beginning was the fact that his book was nearly called My Experiments in Dietics, because he spent so much of his life trying to work out what suited him the most to eat. He thought that was maybe more important to write about. And, I really kind of took that on board, that there isn't any one route. There's only the exploration of what you as an individual run best on. And we are all so unique. We're 50% our parents, but we've also got that whole genetic heritage that comes back. And if you've got family heritage 4, 5, 6, 7 generations ago that was maybe in mining or in some other industry where particular things were showing up, your genetics respond in particular ways. If there were particular illnesses that were present in your family, again, all of these things can affect your genetics, and our genetics are only really responding to the signaling from their environment. So we dropped this idea of genetic determinism a long time ago, and we look at what it is that actually tells your DNA what to do, and that comes from the environment. So working out how your cells are perceiving their environment makes a great deal of difference onto how successfully your body retains a state of health.
You mentioned Otto Warburg, and I believe he's been seriously misquoted over the years, because what he said has been taken out of context. And of course, the acidity side of things, when people have cancer, the cancer tumor itself is kind of creates that is the acidic environment. So it's always going to be there unless you take great lengths to change the environment, as you say, by eating properly, living in the right kind of environment, drinking quality water, having your mind in the right place, etc., etc. It doesn't matter what illness you've got, what label it is, what it's called, how serious it is, unless you take steps to make these changes. Because if you don't change, it's a case of doing the same old thing and expecting different results. It's madness, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it always amazes me how many people, especially after something like a cancer treatment, want to just go back to behaving how they did before, without really being giving any education or acknowledgement that, well, part of the reason why the problem showed up is because of how you lived before. And, because the cancer cells are typically functioning just on glycolysis, they're just functioning on sugar metabolism for energy, rather than on our Krebs cycle, which is oxygen dependent. So as the cells become oxygen starved, and again, we're coming right back to cell membranes and absorption stuff here, This is part of what starts to change the conditions in the cells and is more likely for them to express adverse patterns, whether that be cancer or any other disease. So the maintenance of the system, just like if we put rubbish oil in the engine of the car, it's more likely to seize up or damage it. We just have to understand those basic mechanics for ourselves. And unfortunately, I don't feel that we get good education either through the media, through our schooling, often not through our parents, because there's a lot of just simple convenience and time management being put ahead of quality and actual usefulness within food.
Bottom line is we have to take responsibility ourselves, because nobody else is going to do it for us.
Absolutely, and that's a tough journey as well. It's not like the information is easy. There's a lot of contradiction because there's so many variations, and it's a long case of experimentation of working out what really suits you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm sure the listeners is going to replay this interview time and time again. I certainly will be. So how do people get hold of you?
So if they want to find me, ben@bencolder.co.uk, email, or you can just go to my website, bencolder.co.uk, and you'll find me nice and easy. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and other bits and bobs as well, but you can find all the links for those on my website.
And how are you spelling Calder?
Calder.
So bencolder.co.uk.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ben. I look forward to interviewing you again, having a conversation about some other fangled thing when it gets discovered. We seem to be discovering things, quite on a quite regular basis these days, and the epigenetics conversation is fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And thank you, Elaine. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you again, and definitely look forward to sharing more fun stuff in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.